I find views that now have reached sort of extreme levels, and sometimes some places in the continent, where they say, we need a fully automated luxury communism. We can automate everything and then create a communist country where we redistribute everything. And I think that's just not an infeasible dream. It's actually a destructive way of thinking about the problem, because it completely misses out on the central role that meaningful work plays in our society. And that's why both David and I think you're aligned here, we are putting our energy for thinking about how we can create better labor market opportunities for people.
This is Wally Knox. Welcome to the Political Conversation. Daron Acemoglu has a title Institute Professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. That means he was selected by his colleagues at the MIT Economics Department to be supported in his wide-ranging pursuits far beyond the conventional department definition. Saying that Acemoglu has a wide-ranging intellect is putting it mildly. His work, of course, is centered on economics, and it has the modern flavor of being heavy on the math. But even in economics, his work often is a 21st century version of what was called in prior centuries political economy, economic analysis firmly located in its political framework, and vice versa. Listen for a moment to the titles of some of his books and papers. Why Nations Fail. Why Did the West Extend the Franchise? Eclipse of Rent Sharing. A Model of Online Misinformation. Firms, Failures and Fluctuations. Economic Origins of Dictatorship and Democracy. And Successful Democracies Breed Their Own Support. Wide-ranging indeed. But I invited Acemoglu on the podcast with a very specific question, to lay out for us his important new theory on why our middle class has been in decline and what we can do about it. Let's get into it. Professor Acemoglu, welcome to the Political Conversation.
Thank you, Ollie. It's my pleasure to be here. It's great to join you.
Could we just start with the basics? Would you just quickly state for us your view of what has been happening to middle class earnings since the 1970s?
I think the basic facts are not in dispute. We've had relatively rapid growth since the mid-1970s, not as fast and powerful as what we experienced perhaps in the 1950s and 60s, but robust growth. But median wages, essentially what's going on in the middle of the wage distribution in the U.S., when deflated by the consumer price index so that we take care of inflation, has increased very little. So middle-class families, defined as those in the middle of the wage distribution or income distribution, have benefited only little despite this rapid growth. Now, if you think of not just the middle class, but those who aspire to the American dream, which includes many, many families, millions of families below the median, they have fared worse. They have seen their real wages decline. So if you are a white, non-high school graduate, say you don't have your high school diploma, in your 40s or 50s, you have almost certainly experienced a far worse income profile than your father. Probably your income right now is about 25-30% lower in real terms to what your father had during a similar age. So this is really the bleakest sort of economy you can imagine for some groups of workers in the United States. And this is happening in the midst of what many political and economic leaders never tire of telling us, that we are living in the best of times, technology is revolutionizing everything, the future is bright, we are benefiting from all of the gifts of amazing innovativeness. In the midst of that, there is this reality which is jarring.
They'd be really helpful for folks to understand, to appreciate the distinctiveness of what you're saying, to hear your capsule's summary of what the consensus view has been of what's driving this process, the skill bias technical change view. Can you lay out that for us?
Well, I think this is such a momentous process, trend, and it has been going on for so long that I'm not entirely sure whether there is really a consensus view when you go beyond sort of the economics literature. But I would say there are three sets of ideas that are very dominant, and sometimes they're held in conjunction with each other, sometimes separately. One is that actually the facts that I have given you are exaggerated, that things are not so bleak because the numbers I have given you are based on what the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the federal government measure as inflation. But that's not fair because we've been benefiting from an amazing array of new products and much better services through iPhones and better cameras and the better information retrieval, social media, everything, health, as everything is getting better. And as a result, when you take those things into account, it's not so bleak. Well, there are two problems with that. Let me just immediately put as sort of objections to that view. First of all, that does nothing to the inequality, because even if we mismeasure inflation, that applies to the people at the top as well as the people at the bottom. The increase in inequality is still staggeringly large. Second, when you look at many objective measures, you really don't see this improvement in living standards, like health. We haven't had much of an improvement in life expectancy in the US over the last 2 decades. So there are lots of sort of flies in that particular ointment of optimism. So the second view, which is also somewhat optimistic, would say, well, this is an inevitable disruption on the way to a new economy. So it maintains the optimism that I was alluding to. We're building something better with better technologies, with a different economy that's going to work better for everybody. But on the way there's going to be some disruption. Some people who don't have the skills for the new economy until they acquire them or their children acquire them, they're going to suffer. That's a very difficult view to sort of counter because, perhaps we are in a disruption and perhaps things are going to turn around. But, most people, when they speak of disruptions, they don't mean 4 decades. We've been in the midst of this for 4 decades. So that's a little bit hard as well. And then the third view, which is, used to be the conventional wisdom within economics, that this is skill bias technological change. That these new technologies have increased the demand for skills, and therefore it is natural, inevitable, or perhaps, just part of the regular market process that the more skilled workers, engineers, postgraduates, workers with, specialized skills are going to be the ones who benefit from them. I think there's absolutely some truth to this. The problem is, this view by itself doesn't explain why some people are losing out. If technology increases your skills value more than mine, yes, you will become richer than me, but, I will also benefit. So there's something more than this pure skill bias technological change going on as well.
All right. Let's just leap now, if we may, directly into your latest work on what you think the fundamental driver has been.
Well, my view is that obviously for something so spectacular, we shouldn't be looking for monocausal explanations. There are many aspects, and I don't think you can understand the U.S. labor market, for example, without the disruptive effects that the huge increase in Chinese imports had on some of the communities that used to specialize in apparel or furniture or toys. But overwhelmingly, the most important factor has been automation. The middle class jobs used to be either on factory floors, blue-collar workers who lived the American dream by working in factories and moving up income-wise because those were well-paying, good jobs, or in offices where workers were performing a range of new functions and tasks that started emerging from the beginning of the 20th century. Retail, back office, clerical tasks, some low and middle management tasks, those were the bulk of the middle class. Of course, on top of it, you have the engineers, lawyers, and managers. At the bottom, you have, custodial workers, home care workers, some food preparation service workers. But the middle class was this big group of workers benefiting from modern industrial growth. And automation has been particularly rapid over the last 4 decades, mostly using digital tools. And on the one hand, it has started automating some of those office work. And on the other hand, especially with numerically controlled machinery and then industrial robots, it started a rapid process of automation of blue-collar work. And both of these have been major drivers of both inequality and anemic wage growth. And my work with Pascual Restrepo over the last decade has been focused on trying to document the effects of automation. And the latest paper we have uses a variety of strategies to estimate how important automation has been for the inequality trends in the US. And we can go into the details, but let me give you the bottom line, which is that over half of the increase in inequality, this sort of divergence between high education, low education workers, for example, over half of that is accounted by the direct effect of automation.
And is the direct effect on automation on jeopardizing the work of some workers or on both the top and the bottom? What's your...
Well, it's mostly the middle, actually, the middle and the bottom. So if you look at work that you do, I do, managers, engineers do, actually technology complements us. You wouldn't be able to do this podcast from afar without some of the tools that have become, commonplace over the last 2 decades. Most engineers would not be able to do the kinds of designs and production of machinery without the tools that have been introduced over the last 3 decades or so. So we benefit from new technologies. But if you look
I remember...
Go ahead. Yes, of course.
I remember vividly going into practice as a young attorney. We'd made the decision, my friends and I, that we were going to organize our office differently. We were all computer literate. And rather than having a staff that would do all of the typing and all of the research, we did 90% of that ourselves. And it enabled young attorneys to get off and running much more quickly. But it had a massive change on that whole cadre of highly skilled secretarial work that had done that work previously.
Absolutely. I think, I'm simplifying the discussion here, but office automation is often intertwined with some jobs being done automatically by computer, by machines, and others being reallocated from less skilled to more skilled workers. So sometimes that's great news for skilled workers because they get higher pay and they get more control over some of the processes. Sometimes it's actually not so great news because it actually increases the workload of more skilled workers. It's a bit like automate self-checkout kiosks. It's a misnomer to think that they are self-checkout kiosks. They just shift the work from cashiers to customers.
I was just going to point that out. Everyone who goes to a grocery store sees this process developing before their very eyes, where we end up doing the work that had been done by relatively well-paid grocery workers. And that's vanishing.
Right. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So what we have is that many automation technologies have been spreading rapidly, different ones in different industries, different ones for different tasks and different occupations. And there are distinct effects, but the common element for many of them has been the automation and displacement of middle skill workers and some low skill workers from relatively high paid jobs. So if you look at Ford Motor Company, for example, in the 1950s, they used to hire thousands of workers with high school degree or some without the high school degree. And these used to get some basic training and then used to go on the some sort of assembly line. It had sort of changed from the assembly line of Henry Ford from the earlier in the century, but it was some sort of assembly line, and they used to get paid very high wages. By today's wages, by today's dollars, over $40 an hour. And those jobs are not there anymore. There are some production work left, but it is often intertwined with maintenance and design, and it's much better educated workers that line up to get those jobs after a series of interviews. And many of the things like painting, welding, assembly, those are automated, and a few of them are offshored to other countries. So those jobs have disappeared. Clerical work has also become more skilled, but also fewer clerical workers are employed in many industries.
So there is a convention among economists that the problems of automation are very real, should be recognized, but that the value of the whole process is so massive economy-wide that we should simply accept that and try to deal with the quote-unquote side effects, little things like tens of millions of families no longer really able to live a middle-class life, through government programs of one sort or another. And I gather you take issue with that.
I take issue with that, and that's where, I said, the economist's view of skill-biased technological change and the more sort of Silicon Valley speak of course, disruption is inevitable along the way to progress. Those two sort of merge a little bit. I do not take issue with the following, which is that technological change, when used the right way, has the potential to bring amazing benefits for society. But when used the right way, and then the question is, what is socially beneficial when it comes to using new digital tools? Automation, I'm certainly not against automation. Automation has its role, and if we had not started the process of automation at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, starting from mid-18th century in towns like Manchester in England, we wouldn't be here today. We would not have the comforts and the much higher levels of living standards today. But automation by itself isn't enough. And one way of seeing that is, if you look around you today, most people perform tasks in their jobs or even are in occupations that did not exist 80 years ago. A lot of what we do isn't just continuation of what was done before. It's completely new work that has been created, and all of it is technological. Look, I don't do most of the things that professors at MIT used to do 80 years ago because I have so many other things to do, like working on a computer, communicating via Zoom, doing remote podcasts, much higher level of technology that enables me to do data analysis that, would have been no more than a fantasy 80 years ago. So all of these new tasks are enabled by technological advances. But think about it. That's very different from industrial robots replacing welders on the factory floor. Those technologies are complementing me. They are improving my capabilities. They're improving what I can do. They are probably contributing to my wage quite a bit. So it's really a balance that we need between these types of new tasks and worker complementary technologies, worker-friendly technologies and automation. And it is the absence of that balance that's the problem. And if that balance is absent today, there's no guarantee that it will be there tomorrow. And that's why I think the optimistic read that, well, it's disruption and things will sort of sort themselves out tomorrow doesn't convince me, because if we are in a mindset that singularly focuses on automation today and we don't do anything about it, that mindset is going to become even more powerful tomorrow.
So let's move then into the whole discussion that you have created around taxation of work and taxation of capital investments and automation. You focused on the lack of balance in the way automation is implemented. Let's lead us into what you have developed on why taxes play a major role in that imbalance.
Well, thank you for raising that, Wally. But I want to preface that by saying I believe taxes play a major role, but I do not want to create the impression that they are the only or even the main determinant of the balance between automation and other types of technologies. I think regardless of the taxes and other fiscal incentives, the market economy as we have created today in the United States has other biases that might push us towards too much focus on automation. If you look at which companies are dominating the economy, they are a handful of companies that are that are born out of a desire to automate work, such as Microsoft and Google. There is a lot of emphasis on automation among the leading engineers. The whole field of AI turned into a desire to make advances in such a way that machines reach human parity, meaning they start performing a range of tasks as well as humans. So all of those add to biases. But a very important one is also the tax system, what the government has done. And one very simple way of doing that is to look at what is the average tax that a worker and a firm pay jointly when the firm decides to hire the worker for a job. And we estimate that number is over 25%. It's been over 25% for the last 20 years, 25 years. So what that means is that if I hire you and I pay you $100,000 a year, the two of us jointly will have to pay $25,000 of taxes to the government. Some of it will come from your income tax. Some of it will be my contribution to Social Security and other taxes. Some of it will be your payroll taxes. But they will amount to about $25,000 or over $25,000. Now imagine I decide to perform exactly the same tasks and do the same job. But instead of you, I hire a machine to do it. An AI program or a robot or some dedicated machinery that can perform the same task. And imagine, for the sake of this example, that machine also costs $100,000 a year. So from an economic productivity point of view, there shouldn't be much of a difference between the two. Human costs $100,000, machine costs $100,000. But in the US today, I would have a very, very strong incentive to choose the machine. Why? Because at the moment, if I did that, I would pay $5,000 in taxes, 5% rather than 25%. So I saved $20,000 in this example by switching to the machine. Now, of course, this is an example. Reality is more complex, and it matters what kind of company I am. C corporations pay corporate income taxes, S corporations don't, so I've taken the average. It matters whether I finance the machine purchase by debt or with retained earnings, etc. But on average, it works out around 5%.
And looking back in time, say to the year 2000, what did that average come to?
Well, unfortunately, already in 2000, things were not even between capital and labor, but they were much closer to symmetry. So at the time, I would pay something above 15%, around 15%. So instead of 5,000, I would pay 15,000 taxes.
Mm-hmm.
So it will be a little closer to what I pay for labor with 25,000.
So in gross generality, then, are we talking about the George W. Bush corporate tax cuts followed by the recent Donald Trump tax cuts, the cumulative effect of which was to lower taxation on new automation from the 15%, maybe 20% range down to 5%?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think if you want to go into the details, there are two legs of these policy changes. And again, both of them, you are absolutely right. They were initiated under George Bush's presidency and were strengthened with the latest tax cuts under President Trump. But these two are perhaps worth distinguishing. One is there is lower taxes on capital income, and that some of it takes the form of lower corporate income taxes, and some of it takes the form of lower federal income taxes if you can show that your earnings are from capital gains. But then there is another and even more powerful change, which is for this purpose at hand, not for other things, but for this issue of what's the average marginal income tax on capital. It's the depreciation allowances. So initially, they were supposed to be transitory stimulus measures, but a series of accelerated depreciation allowances were introduced as a way of boosting investment. And what they do is that they enable companies to immediately write off the expenditure that they make on equipment or computers, and that reduces their tax burden right away.
So if going back to your $100,000 computer replacing a $100,000 employee, I purchased the computer in 2022, and I immediately get to deduct that $100,000 from my earnings, and my earnings go down by that, and I am not taxed on that.
Exactly. That's a perfectly accurate summary.
You then go on to create a theory of where the tax rates optimally should be. Can you walk us into that?
Well, I think the measurement part, of course, people may disagree. The numbers are complex, but it is data. So we know what's out there, and we are describing a real phenomenon. Now, it becomes much harder to say, well, okay, you don't like what's out there. Well, what should we do instead? That gets into issues of economic theory, issues of what the different responses to taxes on capital and labor will be. But in a nutshell, what we say is that actually there isn't a powerful reason for treating capital more favorable than labor. If anything, if you want to deviate from symmetric taxes of the same rate on capital and labor, you want to do that a little bit more on labor because, workers who are employed generate a lot of benefits for society, and there are a variety of reasons for why firms may already shy away from hiring enough workers. So if anything, you want to give a little bit of a boost to the worker side, not the capital side, but at the very least, you should be on the symmetric part. So that means reduce taxes on labor and modestly increase taxes on capital. For instance, you could achieve that by significantly reducing payroll taxes, which are quite regressive because the middle class and lower earning Americans pay most of it.
So I'd like to transition now here and bring out one of the most interesting aspects of your work. You touched on this earlier, but I'd like to hear you develop it further. You made the point that all automation is not the same. Some automation, in the way you described it, complements my work. I'm working at a factory, I have a certain job. the automation comes in for one reason or another. I am not laid off. I am still there, but I now have a machine to operate that enhances my abilities. It complements me, as I believe the way you put it. Other kinds of automation are flat out destructive to jobs. They replace the worker. I flat out get laid off, and that has happened a great deal. But to you, it seems to me, the point about the beneficial effects of some automation is very important, and you're trying to create a distinction in how those two different kinds of automation are treated. Can you walk us into what your thought is there?
Well, I would use slightly different language. I would say there is a difference between general machinery or technology and automation on the one hand. So when I am talking of a technology such as this wonderful remote podcasting opportunities or Zoom, those are not automation technologies because they are not automating some tasks that I used to perform. They're actually boosting what I could do before. So I would not call them automation. And that's one important distinction. So many of the new tasks that I mentioned are created by not automation technologies, but other technological advances that were targeted at expanding.
Let's just make that really clear to our listeners. When you use the term automation, that you are specifically talking about job displacing automation.
I am specifically talking about algorithms or machinery that takes over tasks performed by workers. Now, what that implies for employment, I'll come back to in a second. But that's the first distinction between automation and things that create new tasks or more worker-friendly technologies. And I think that balance is critical. But even within automation, there is reason for distinguishing a range of different types of automations, as you've already anticipated. And there, the big distinction is between very high productivity automation and what Pasquale Restrepo and I call so-so automation. What we mean by so-so automation is exactly exemplified by the self-checkout kiosks. They automate work. You don't need the cashiers anymore, but they haven't really increased productivity. They have shifted work from cashiers to customers. The production process is not revolutionized. You don't get your groceries for cheaper. Your life is not changed because of that. That tends to just displace worker and not much else. But imagine automation of the form that, for instance, was taking place in the second half of the 19th century in the United States, the what people call sometimes American system of manufacturing. A huge set of advances came in that enabled much faster, higher quality manufacturing because you had standardized parts that you could put together and produce it much faster. You didn't need as skilled artisans who would work with a chisel in order to sort of shave off parts from one piece in order to make it fit. It was much more sort of automatic in some sense. That was a huge advance. And what it did is, of course, it did displace some of the workers. But on the other hand, because it was so uplifting in terms of productivity, that it created a lot of jobs as well. And the way to think about this is, in general, is, okay, I'm automating and displacing some workers, but then do I want to hire more workers into the non-automated parts of the production process? For so-so automation, no. The answer is no, because you're not really changing. Just because I have established self-checkout kiosks, I'm not going to go and hire more food inspectors because it's not changing anything. But if you do just the right type of automation and you increase productivity, that could actually be a game changer and it could get companies to grow. And there is a lot of evidence that successful companies that automate do expand.
And from a society point of view, it would be good to encourage one type and good to discourage the second type.
Absolutely. But even then, I would say just automation isn't enough. Even when we do the high productivity automation, we still want to encourage the worker-friendly technologies as well. Why is that? Because if we do just the high productivity innovation, it's great for GDP, it's great for national income, it's great for production, it's great for American competitiveness. But at the end of the day, automation tends to generate the benefits for the companies, for profits, for capital owners, and not enough for labor. So we would get a worsening distribution of income. And again, worker-friendly technologies are key. It is quite critical that at the same time as we are automating some jobs, we're creating new opportunities for workers.
So let's turn now, if we may, to how you think we should or how you have recently proposed we can step toward accomplishing that, and via the taxation system.
Well, I think we're talking of a very complex phenomenon here. So there is no silver bullet. But the different factors that influence the balance between automation and worker-friendly technologies already suggest some pathways for thinking about how we can create a better industrial strategy. I think a first step would be, indeed, as we talked about, to level the playing field between capital and labor. If we have an economy in which, if we had an economy in which, capital and labor were both benefiting, we were creating tons of jobs and wages were increasing very rapidly, then we could have a debate about saying, well, should we tax capital more or less? But the reality is that over the last 40 years, we've had an economy in which capital has benefited and labor hasn't benefited. We are increasingly worried about creating more and more employment. In such an economy, there is no justification for being so heavy-handed in the taxation of labor and so permissive, so encouraging, and so capital biased in the taxation of corporate gains and profits. So I think leveling that playing field would be a useful first step. But is that enough? No, I don't think so. I think we need a broader conversation about what we want from technology. So if the future of technology in the US is in the hands of Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, that's a very different world than one in which there is a diversity of new technologies, a plurality of different approaches to creating jobs and creating new technologies. It's not because these companies are, anti-worker. It's just they have a particular business model that's very much based on doing everything algorithmically and by automation. So what that means is we need another set of actors who will shepherd the US technology frontier in a direction that is powerfully more pro-worker. And that's not going to be achieved just by marginal changes in taxes. We need a change in the market structure, and we need a change in the perspective and what the policymakers really want. Who are they, following in terms of the types of things that they are going to support and so on. And more broadly, we may also need to do a little bit of soul searching in terms of what it is that we want from digital tools. Today, the best and the brightest students from all over the world come and study artificial intelligence or computer science in the United States, and that's wonderful because that's a field that's at the forefront of the future of technology. But then the question emerges, what determines the aspirations of these young, brilliant minds? Where are they going to channel their energy? And I think it is fair to say today that they are under the influence of a set of forces that push them more in a direction that focuses on automation. First of all, most of them see the highest paying, most prestigious jobs to be in the companies that I just named. But those companies are looking for engineers who will do more and more automation. Even more broadly, the ethos of the fields that I've mentioned is that if you want to prove your skills, you will work out algorithms that are better than humans. So it is baked into the field in some sense that seeking human parity is one of the highest achievements that you can go after. So what that means is that we're creating an artificial bias in leading these people towards more and more in the direction of automation. And I think there is no need for it. If you look at the history of computing in the United States, there are many inspirational people who thought of computing not as something that would replace humans, but as something that would be useful to humans. And some of the most iconic innovations in the digital area came out of that. The mouse. What is the mouse? The mouse is an amazing tool that enables humans to perform tasks much more easily and much more broadly. Graphical user interface, hyperlinks, all of those are usefulness of computers that do not replace humans. There's no human reaching human parity in any of these tools. And we need to recreate that ethos.
So let me press you then to what I found your most striking thought, your most unusual contribution to this. And let me preface it this way. When I hear the discussion between the left and the right about automation, and they're not using it in your term, they're just using it in a more broad term, the conversation revolves between the right, which says, well, we've reduced taxes on businesses, but we haven't reduced it enough. If we reduce it even more, we'll get more production and the economy will be better. Individual workers will be more productive, et cetera, et cetera. And from the left, the critics then say, no, you have it wrong. What we need to do is increase taxes on corporations. They're not paying enough taxes. Both sides are proposing a blanket approach to how corporations should be taxed. One side wants lower, one side wants higher. You're not saying that. You're saying something different. Clue us in on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I am advocating is not a blanket tax that discourages investment. I think that's the last thing we need. We need more innovation and more investment in this country. But I also don't believe that the market system as we have it right now in the United States is necessarily choosing the right direction of that innovation. It makes a big difference whether that innovation comes yet as more market dominance for Facebook or Google versus a new company that works out new ways of doing things. But even more fundamentally, what I'm saying is that it makes an even deeper difference if that innovation automates work or if it creates new jobs, new opportunities, new tasks for workers. And we need much more of the latter. And I would not say that we need less automation. I'm saying we need automation as well, but we need a much more balanced portfolio, which means that now it is time for us to put a lot more effort in the worker-friendly technologies.
So the taxation system, which is one of our tools we have to affect this whole process, would affect, we'll go back to the $100,000 machine. There are two versions. One is the way you initially proposed it. A human being earning $100,000 a year is replaced by the $100,000 machine. Second version, $100,000 machine comes in, and Wally and Daron now have a machine that allows them to be much more productive than we other would. You would see those two items as taxed very differently in the taxation system.
I think that would be great. The problem is doing that identification is very difficult. So if we could clearly identify those things, then I would be in favor of having this broader conversation, despite the fact that, in the United States right now, we are in such dysfunctional political equilibrium that, I'm not sure whether any of that conversation would go anywhere, but I would definitely be in favor of having that conversation. In the same way that I am hugely in favor of having a conversation and policy in which we tax fossil fuels and we subsidize renewable energy. I view the two problems as parallel. The challenge is that today we know what renewable energy is. There are also gray areas, by the way. It's not a perfect knowledge. Like, we subsidize electric vehicles like mad, but, where does that electricity come from in the US? It comes almost all from coal. So electric vehicles then go and consume coal-powered electricity. So, there are gray areas, but ultimately, there's a big difference between solar and wind-generated renewable energy and fossil fuel energy. That distinction is much harder for automation. I think we can get better at that measurement. But right now, if I give you an AI program and say, can you say for certain what this is doing? And it will be really hard. Well, is this automating work, or is this actually creating new skills and new jobs and new tasks for some workers? That makes it difficult to do a very fine tax system that selectively subsidizes some types of innovation or some types of capital and not others. And it would be very open to manipulation. So for that reason, I'm saying, well, let's start by leveling the playing field between capital and labor. That's the first step.
Mm-hmm. The first thought that came to my mind when I read your ideas on different levels of taxation for destructive automation and productive automation, I could just see the tax lawyers going bonkers. Yes, exactly. In a sense, it's a full employment act for corporate tax attorneys to prove that every single thing I purchase really has a beneficial effect for one or another employee. Therefore, my company should be taxed very, very little.
Right. Of course. Absolutely. 100%. That having been said, we talked about these depreciation allowances. Well, those depreciation allowances are, specific to industries, specific to the type of equipment. So we already have very complex tax systems. So it's not like, our tax system is simple at the moment, and it's already a pretty good employment, full employment act for accountants. So if we could do the measurement much better, I think there could be ideas for thinking of a broader term rather than making, say, the depreciation allowance as a function of which industry you are, and the durability of capital. We can also include in that whether it's an explicit automation technology, but we're not there yet.
It strikes me that we're not there yet, but it strikes me as a worthy thing for us to get there on, for this reason, if nothing else. Even among those of us who are deeply concerned about the fate of the middle class and don't agree with the optimistic assessments that this really is not something we need to be concerned about, people like me, I'm not speaking for you, who are concerned that the fate of the middle class is completely, deeply entwined with the fate of the American Republic, period. The solution to this problem is paramount. Concern. It's a kind of a fundamental issue. If we could get to the point where we could be confident that we had an approximation that had some real validity to it on the differences between destructive and beneficial kinds of new automation, and your theory is correct on that, we could take a step forward on the middle class issue that simply hasn't been done before. Your view about the differences, the productive aspect of automation and the unproductive aspect of automation is, in my experience, a new idea in this debate. It has not been laid out before.
Well, thanks for saying that, and I completely agree with you. My views on this are very much aligned with yours. I think the faith of the middle class is critical both for the type of society we want to live in and also for American democracy. And also, I agree with you that a caricature of the two extreme policy positions that you outlined, soak the corporations or give the corporations even more tax handouts, neither of these come to grips with the condition of the American middle class.
Yeah, I was struck by when you approach it from your point of view, here I am, full disclosure, I'm a strong Democrat. I've been a Democrat ever since I came back from the Vietnam War. Was not a Democrat before, but came back a Democrat and remain a Democrat today. So that's where my political orientation lies. But my friends on the Democrat side who always encourage increasing taxes on corporations simply haven't thought through the line of reasoning you're talking about. If we are blanket increasing the cost of every kind of technical change, we're hurting a whole bunch of workers. We may be helping some, but we are definitely hurting some as well. And we need to understand that.
Absolutely. 100% agreed, but I would go even further. I think the plight of the middle class, who has been the major loser out of these 4 decades of economic developments, I think is not internalized by either party fully. And I think that is the sort of third rail of American politics right now.
Well, it has not been internalized, but it has been exploited.
Exactly, that's right. That's true.
And
that is for sure.
And we've got to find a way of moving beyond that. So what I love about your work is the struggle you're in. You mentioned that you're working with Pasquale Restrepo for a decade on your ideas and are continuing to work on it now. And what has attracted me following your work through the years is that you saw these issues early on and became deeply concerned with what to do. And that's why I wanted to sit down and talk with you about this. Let me ask you, if I may, an obvious question, but it's one I asked David Autor when I interviewed him just a few weeks ago on his work on the middle class issues. And he, as you know, has written a whole book on work and how to make work in America better. And I posed to him a simple question. Why is work important? There is a strain in my political party which simply says this is all about money. The middle class is not making enough money. Why don't we simply raise taxes on the rich or the big corporations, collect all the money, and plunk it down on the middle class and turn a struggling middle class family into a flourishing middle class family? Problem solved. Why is work involved?
Well, let me say a few things, and I think this is a great way to wrap up everything, because I think it will touch on most of the issues that we've been talking about. First of all, David Autor has been a leader in this area, and he has been working like me on these issues of automation for, over 2 decades from various different angles. And I think he has a deep appreciation of the issues at hand. And I think both David and I are completely aligned in thinking that work and what happens in the labor market is critical. People define themselves, their social status, their self-worth by partly what they do. And work has been an amazing nexus because it enables people to gain a self-worth while at the same time also in a functioning society earn a decent living. And it is this sort of meeting of self-worth, living, social networks that makes the labor market or work so central to our modern society. Of course, the US needs a very robust safety net. We need redistribution. We need aid to families with poor children. We need unemployment insurance, social insurance. But those are complements to the labor market that creates opportunities for advancement, for building careers, for building a sense of self-worth, or sometimes people call that dignity. So in that sense, I find views that now have reached sort of extreme levels, and sometimes some places in the continent, where they say, we need a fully automated luxury communism. We can automate everything and then create a communist country where we redistribute everything. And I think that's just not an infeasible dream. It's actually a destructive way of thinking about the problem, because it completely misses out on the central role that meaningful work plays in our society. And that's why both David and I think you're aligned here, we are putting our energy for thinking about how we can create better labor market opportunities for people.
Well, gosh, I guess we are aligned. I want to thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today. Daron, it's been a great pleasure speaking with you this past hour. Thank you for your work. I look forward to your new work.
Well, my new book, which will join with Simon Johnson, which will come out in May, is exactly on these topics. So hopefully we'll continue the conversation.
Looking forward to reading it. Thank you very much. Let me return for a moment to Acemoglu's discussion of self-service checkout stands, because it clarifies his concerns by being so specific. You and I are increasingly forced to check out our own groceries. We do the work that relatively well-paid cashiers did previously. Those workers are laid off. The grocery company reaps the benefits. But let me ask you, have you noticed the price of groceries declining as the stands appear? And as Acemoglu points out, the increased productivity, the supposed justification for the change, is tiny. After all, the work does not disappear. You and I are now doing the work for free. It is a perfect example of destructive automation. And self-checkout in groceries is spreading. Walmart, Kroger, and Dollar General are trying out stores that are exclusively self-checkout. There is now a move in businesses to spread automated checkout stands to every retail operation. In my local Rite Aid pharmacy, they installed the stands. Costco has begun using them in some areas. Now stop and think about how the self-service stands are financed. Companies buy them, then they claim them as an expense of doing business and deduct that cost from their earnings so that their taxes shrink. The effect is that our tax system subsidizes businesses to replace workers with machines that then depend on their customers to run them. And this is called progress? So self-service checkout stands are my pick of a great place to start pushing back on destructive automation. They should no longer be considered a legitimate business expense which can be deducted come tax time. The most important thing Acemoglu does is to pose questions no one asks about our tax system. To Republicans perpetually wanting to cut business taxes, why do you want to increase the bias against honest work? Today, work is taxed at 25%, and capital is taxed at 5%. Isn't that already too big a bias? Why do you want to increase it? And to Democrats who want to raise those same taxes, why do you want to tax business innovations that help workers earn more? Both parties, Democrats and Republicans, propose blanket changes to the tax system and never stop to think that their blanket approach is harming working people. Indeed, in Acemoglu's view, a blanket approach to business taxes in the past 40 years crushed middle-class progress, and in Acemoglu's devastating words, resulted in the bleakest economy you can imagine for those who have not made it into the middle class. They are now trapped in low-paying jobs with a lid on their progress because the entire class above them, the middle class, is itself stagnating. Acemoglu's questions must be asked, must enter the public realm. They must confront politicians who have their nifty proposals. Does your proposal distinguish between automation that destroys jobs and innovation that helps workers earn more? If not, how can you possibly justify it? And how can you possibly earn my vote? My thanks to Daron Acemoglu for spending time with the political conversation, and as always, to my producer Anna Kumu for her excellent work. In coming episodes, I will be in conversation with Harvard Kennedy School professor Danny Roderick, on his proposed new paradigm to replace the neoliberal paradigm which dominated since the 1980s, with Professor Lynn Vavreck of UCLA on her controversial views about the significance of the 2020 election, with Berkeley economist Brad DeLong on economic progress in the long 20th century, and Joan Williams, author of the 2017 blockbuster White Working Class, on the political turmoil since her book was published just a few months after the election of Donald Trump. I look forward to seeing you then.